What's up guys, Asian here again with another theory crafting video, and today we're going to be going over the Master Daggers. We're going to be seeing whether or not these guys, ever since the buff that was applied to them during Clockwork City patch, whether that's made them a viable option for stamina DPS. So for those of you guys who don't know what I'm talking about, here are the Master's Daggers right there. They can be obtained from Dragonstar Arena on Vet. You just have to finish the arena and you will get a master weapon drop. If you are lucky enough to get a dual wield master set, you always get two of them. They can come in daggers, swords, maces, or axes. So it's kind of random whichever one you get. Obviously Master Daggers and Master's Axe are going to be the ones that you want to get, just because they're probably the best ones for stamina DPS. And as you can see there, they are part of a unique set effect known as Stinging Slashes. It basically increases the bleed damage Twin Slashes deals by 1500 each tick. So that's actually a fairly large buff to Twin Slashes. However, there are a couple of concerns with the Master's Dagger. First of all, if you're using Master's Dagger, you're basically forfeiting one of two things. You're either forfeiting your monster helm or you're forfeiting a 5-piece set. So remember that we have exactly 12 pieces of armor and weapons and jewelry in order to create our build. So the most common thing that stamina people do are we use two 5-piece sets, and then we use a monster helm. That gives us, at least in theory, the most amount of DPS. Now, if you decide to use the Master's Dagger, you need to have two of them in order to get the set effect. So if we replace these two daggers with Master's Dagger, all of a sudden we now only have 10 slots left to fill in. So if we reserve 5 of those slots for a 5-piece set, that leaves us with another 5 slots. If we decide to use a Monster Helm, then we only have 3 slots left for a set effect. Or if we decide to forego the Monster Helm, we can go with a full 5-piece set instead. So that's kind of the sacrifice that you have to make here with the Master's Dagger. You either have to give up your Monster Helm, which is a fairly large part of your DPS, or you have to give up a second 5-piece set, which is also a fairly sizable chunk of your DPS. Now, the way most people do it, and the way I'm going to be testing it today, is we'll be giving up our second 5-piece set, but we will be keeping our Veladreth's Monster Helm instead. So that's kind of the setup that I'm going to go with. However, you can go the other way around. You can give up Veladreth and end up with two 5-piece sets instead. It's totally up to you. However, most of the tests that I've seen and most of the tests that I've done indicate that sacrificing the Monster Helm is just too big of a drop compared to sacrificing the second 5-piece effect. Now, the most common setup here, if you are going to be using Master's Dagger, is to keep a penetration set up on your armor, so either that's Thunderflame, Night Mother's Gaze, if you're doing group buffs, more like Tong, or if you are deciding to go more selfish, Twice Fang Snake or Spriggans. And then for your 3-piece set, that's going to be Vicious Ophidian. That's just because with the 3-piece effect of Vicious Ophidian, you're at least maintaining Minor Slayer, and that's really the best option right now for 3-piece sets if you're going to be using Master's Dagger. If you don't have Vicious Ophidian, you can also go with Agility Jewelry, Robust obviously. Agility isn't that bad. It's not necessarily as good as Vicious Ophidian. I'm going to be exploring that aspect of things a little bit later in a different video, just kind of seeing whether Vicious Ophidian or Agility works out better if you decide to use Master's Daggers or the Maelstrom Daggers for that matter. I'm going to also be doing a video looking at the Maelstrom's Dagger, just to see how good Maelstrom Daggers are after they've been buffed. So we'll be on the lookout for those 2 videos later on, or I guess 3. So what we're going to be doing today, we're just going to be doing 2 different tests. I've already done several parses already. So the first one, we're going to be doing 5-piece Vicious Ophidian, 5-piece Thunderflame, and 2-piece Veladreths. And then when we swap over to our Master's Dagger, we'll be keeping our 3-piece Vicious Ophidian just on our jewelry, keeping the 5-piece Thunderflame and Veladreths, and we'll just be swapping out our daggers. So everything is going to remain the same. We're going to be using the same traits with the same enchants and the same hands. So all that's going to remain the same. We're still going to be using a Nern Maelstrom bar with a double Ravage health poison. So that's the only real thing that's really changing. We're just going to be changing out these daggers. So another thing that kind of concerns people about Master's Dagger is the Twin Slash's uptime. So if we take a look at Twin Slashes here, uh, it has a 9-second duration, and so it's kind of difficult to maintain 100% uptime on Twin Slashes. I have here Blood Craze, but even if we have the other morph rending slashes, that's still a 9-second duration. So that's the other thing that's kind of concerns people with Master's Daggers, is in order to make the most out of them, you need to maintain your Blood Craze or rending slashes uptime. Now, depending on where it falls in your rotation, you might drop it off for 2 or 3 seconds each full rotation, which does start to add up. So that's one of the concerns with the Master Daggers, not being able to pull the same amount of DPS. The other concern, and this is less so for stam DKs and more so for classes like Nightblades, where they have a lot more light weaving going on, is the loss of the 5-piece effect of Vicious Ophidian, which reduces the cost of stamina abilities by 8%. So that's kind of a hit to your sustain. So there is also that concern of losing out on the Vicious Ophidian sustain boost, because typically speaking, when you are using the Master's Daggers, Vicious Ophidian is the one that gets axed the 5-piece effect. So there is that concern there. So it's not that big of a deal on stam BKs, because you do 4 to 3 heavy attacks every front bar rotation, which is typically enough to sustain your stamina when you combine that with Battle Roar and your potions and things like that, even on a non-red guard class. But it is something to consider for people like Stamsorks, Stamplars, where you don't get resources back for every ultimate that you use. So those are the two big concerns with theory crafters about the Master's Daggers: the sustain drop from dropping your 5-piece Vicious Ophidian, as well as the maintaining your Blood Craze or Rending Slashes uptime. So when we take a look at our Combat Matrix parse, we'll take a look at Bleeding Slashes, the uptime, just to see how much uptime we're actually able to maintain on a Stam DK's rotation as I'm doing it right now. So I am not changing my rotation at all between the two parses. There is probably a more optimal way to maintain the Twin Slashes bleed, but if there is, I don't know how the rotation, I haven't worked it out yet. So that is our that's our non-Master's Daggers parse. So now we're just going to swap out our daggers. So while we're doing the parse, make sure to keep an eye on our stamina resource, so you guys are able to see the difference that it makes losing out on the 5-piece Vicious Ophidian. You're obviously not going to be able to see it right away, but towards the end of the parse, it's going to become a lot more apparent. The loss of 8% from Vicious Ophidian is actually fairly hard hitting. I already see that our stamina is dropping fairly low already. even on a stam DK. Granted, I am not a red guard, so the sustain problems might not be as pronounced on a red guard tune, but if you aren't a red guard, it's kind of the drop in sustain from losing VO is actually fairly bad. So you can see there, towards the end of our parse there, we were actually dangerously low on stamina. So this is our Master Dagger parse. Again, I'm just going to add things in while I talk. So we can see here, we're going to be looking at Blood Craze uptime. So here we only have 66% uptime on our Blood Craze. So that's, like I said earlier, one of the concerns with using the Master Daggers is, can we maintain Blood Craze uptime greater than this 66%? You can see here though, if we swap over to our VO parse here, our Blood Craze bleed didn't actually pull that much DPS, 1717, but when we look at our Master Dagger, it almost doubles up to almost 31k there, or 3.1k I should say. So the Master Dagger's effect is actually a fairly nice boost to Blood Craze, but again the problem is we're only able to maintain 66% uptime on that parse, 67% on the other parse. So on a stam DK, at least the way I have my rotation set up currently, that's kind of what we're looking at right now. Is there a different rotation that can optimize your Blood Craze uptime in order to make the most out of that bleed? You can see here that the difference in DPS isn't actually that big. So if I find a way to up that Blood Craze uptime to maybe 75% or 80%, that might actually be able to push it so it does match the two 5-piece sets together. But again, one of the big things that we have to be concerned about is our stamina drain. You know, we can see here just from regen per second, restrain per second, that there's not that big of a difference here. It's actually a larger difference in our VO parse. But you did see towards the end of our parse there that our stamina pool was lower with the Master's Dagger parse versus the Vicious Ophidian parse. So that is something to keep in mind. On the Stam BK, if you're able to pop your ultimates, if you're using something like Ballista, combined with the Red Guards and your potions, you shouldn't see that big of a problem. But if you're not a Red Guard, and if you're not a Stamina DK, or with the Battle Roar passive, you might that sustain drop from losing the VO 5-piece set bonus. That might actually end up ruining your rotation a little bit, especially on the longer fights, just because you aren't able to sustain yourself by dropping, just because you are getting that 8% extra reduction. So we're going to move over now to our spreadsheet. Here we have 6 parses across both categories. These are our parses. Here are our averages. Here's our standard deviations. And while I talk, I will quickly just give you guys the differences between the two of them. So you can see here that the Master's Daggers actually isn't pulling that badly compared to the two 5-piece effects, the two 5-piece sets there. It's only about a just over 500 DPS difference. So the difference is about 1.4%, which is a lot smaller than I initially anticipated. Actually, I actually thought it would perform a lot worse than it actually is. So it does seem like Master's Daggers is a viable option for stamina DPS, or at the very least on a stamina DK. Like I said earlier, that loss of sustain is probably going to hit other stamina classes harder, just because you guys don't have an equivalent to Battle Roar, which really helps out the stamina DK's sustain, along with the fact that stamina DKs do a lot of heavy attacks. So that is something to keep in mind here. So Master Daggers might only really be good on stamina DKs, and of course there is probably some rotation tweaking that has to happen in order to get our Blood Craze uptime higher. If we manage to get it up, like I said, to 75-80%, we might be able to see Master Daggers start to match or even outdo Sunder and VO combined together. So definitely, I would say hold on to your Master Daggers. If you do happen to get them when you're running vDSA, they're definitely something that can potentially become best in slot later on down the line. I definitely just hold on to them. If you don't have VO daggers, vDSA is a lot easier to farm. It is fairly long and you do need a very good team, but it is easier to farm compared to VO daggers in my opinion. It's just easier to get 4 people to run vDSA for 2 or 3 hours compared to trying to get 12 people to stay for multiple runs of a trial. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.